I'm Roger Baker, Executive Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE, a global center of excellence for geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Learn how you can put geopolitics to work for your organization at ranenetwork.com.
Nonprofit professionals and perhaps even board members, take a look at the for-profit world. Look at the examples of great customer service, of foresight and planning and anticipating into the future how organizations can weather economic storms or pandemic storms or periods of uncertainty.
You are listening to the RANE Insights podcast series. I'm Emily Donahue. Over the past few years, RANE has shared insights on board management. In this podcast, in our summits with NASDAQ on board excellence and oversight, and in regular briefings with our clients. All of those were geared toward defining and refining the board's role in overseeing and supporting an organization. But what happens when members of the board are not engaged with the leaders of the business they are overseeing? In this podcast, our host, RANE Founder David Lawrence, speaks to Hardy Smith, who spent decades working in the high-speed corporate world of NASCAR racing and advocating for nonprofits and associations across the country.
Hardy, it's a great privilege and honor to have a chance to speak to you. And you've had a very, very interesting career, and I'm going to be delving into not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it, and the lessons from the past that you've applied. So thank you for joining us. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation because generally the issue of governance amongst firms, whether not-for-profit or for-profit, or even within a government agency, is hugely important, very topical, and at a time where we've seen an erosion of institutional trust by the public, your work is not only interesting, but obviously very important, very valuable. So welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Well, David, thank you so very much. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and the listeners of your podcast, and I look forward to a very enlightening and enjoyable conversation.
So let's just jump in. The logical question is always, what's the nexus between NASCAR and the ability to advise boards, particularly boards of not-for-profits, and we'll call it the lessons that you're applying. Maybe you can share with the audience just a little bit about I think it was close to 30 years, was it not, Hardy, of experience in the NASCAR world?
That's correct, David. Thank you. I always appreciate that question, going from NASCAR to nonprofits. During my work in the high-performance world of NASCAR racing, what I did during those days for NASCAR, I do now in the nonprofit sector. So during that time, both professionally and personally, I was very deeply involved with nonprofit organizations, chambers of commerce, associations, community groups nationwide. So again, professionally and personally. So the connection that I bring is that I am not a career nonprofit professional. So the background that I share in experience and the lessons that I bring is one of pragmatism, of looking at situations from a different perspective. In the world of NASCAR racing, it's so competitive that you're always, if you're the first place winner of a race, then you're going to tear down your engine. You want to find out why you won the race so you can replicate it at the next event. But if you finished second through last place, then that just wasn't a successful outing. So you're going to tear down your engine, your car, to find out why you didn't win, to make sure you avoid those mistakes. And in my, I guess my 1 or 2 sentence job description, David, while working in NASCAR, was to identify problems before they existed and make sure they didn't happen. And if by some chance a problem did pop up that I didn't take care of in advance, I'm darn well better sure to get a solution and get it quickly. And so the situation at hand is resolved. So bringing that focus, results-oriented focus, is what I bring to the world of nonprofits, because in the world of nonprofits, there are a number of challenges, and we in the nonprofit sector, we tend to think, well, as long as we're doing good, that's really all we have to focus on. So that's doing good can get people in trouble quite often. So I help bring solutions to long-standing challenges where the nonprofit sector keeps seeing these situations repeat themselves over and over, but haven't been successful in finding the answers they need.
What I'm hearing is, Hardy, in your role of the business behind the business, it very much puts you in contact with a wide variety of not-for-profits and community-based organizations.
Yes, absolutely, and seeing both hands-on involvement, direct involvement, and also, David, from a point of observation, sideline observer, if you will. And I've seen a whole lot of nonprofits, and certainly there are a lot of great organizations that are out there across the country, both locally and nationally, that do tremendous amount of work. But they're give or take a few here or there. There are about 1.8 million nonprofits in the United States, and so many of those have recurring issues that create a great deal of frustration, that limit their effectiveness, that definitely create a situation that they're not achieving what their mission says they would like to achieve at a level that they would like to achieve it. And there are some reasons for that.
I would like for you to take the audience on a little bit of a tour of your years, both at NASCAR, but also obviously working with these nonprofits. And let me remind the audience of why this matters a little bit, the lessons that Hardy's going to share with us. Number one, it matters to the effectiveness and efficiency of the organization itself, for sure. But for the vast, vast majority, I think what was it, Giving Tuesday we just had, Hardy, last week?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So the one thing, irrespective of how America is sometimes portrayed as being very divided and tribalistic, people who work in the nonprofit world will also talk about the incredible charity and grace of the American people.
Yes.
Particularly when there is a specific problem. The work, Hardy, that you have done, it's not just for the institutions themselves, on behalf of them, but it's also about the people who give money and volunteer time, because they're doing all of this with the operating assumption that it's going to make a difference, whether it's financially or in terms of resources that might be provided or time and talent. People want to address something. And so the effectiveness of a governing board over an institution, particularly in the nonprofit world, it matters to a variety of stakeholders, internally at the organization, the board members, obviously, but the people who are contributing time, money, talent, and very often government funds. Is that at least an operating premise, Hardy, before?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, David.
So Hardy, share with us sort of your journey and the lessons learned and what you try to do in working with the wide variety of nonprofits that are your, I'll call them partners as opposed to clients.
Sure, absolutely, and I like that. That's good. I think in just kind of dovetailing along with your identification of the premise, America has something here that's really unique. It doesn't. The world of nonprofits and the social sector really does, and this is well documented, throughout history. We've got something here that's unique to America. The rest of the world doesn't really have what we have in the way of the nonprofit, not-for-profit concepts and the charitable giving and the philanthropy. It just doesn't work the way it works here. So that's something that's very unique. It goes back to the founding of the country. What we see, though, is that there are, as in life, that affect the nonprofits, also affect for-profits, the corporate world, all of us individually. Life happens, and life happens in a very, very big way. And so whether or not it's a natural disaster situation, we're dealing with the ravages of Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Nicole in Florida, where I live right now. We're still, dealing with various levels of the COVID pandemic. There have been economic downturns in the past. That's part of our, and then upswings, of course, that's part of our economic life cycle. And there's a prediction, I'm not an economist, but there's a prediction of some kind of something not good getting ready to happen with our economies. I just say all that to say this. Nonprofits should be anticipating. Nonprofits should constantly be looking to the future to future-proof themselves against unexpected challenges and negative situations that will impact their ability to collect funds, will impact their ability to serve their mission. And I'm a believer in the engagement of, the engagement of a nonprofit's board as a high value asset will help an organization future-proof itself against various calamities of unknown natures that are sure to happen. So while, you see reports of charitable giving in response to a particular situation, it could be war in the Ukraine, it could be COVID, it could be hurricanes, whatever it is. Well, there doesn't really, sometimes those headlines are misleading. It's not that more money is being given. We as a country, we haven't become more charitable. There's a shift in the charitable giving. So actually, during the course of situations, disasters, they're actually winners and losers. So, for example, if you, David, as a contributor of sharing your resources, and just say, for example, you've been a big believer in protecting our environment, and that's certainly a worthwhile charitable endeavor. But maybe the war in Ukraine, maybe a hurricane situation really touched your heartstrings. And so you said, you know what, I give every year, I'm giving $5,000 a year this year, and I've been giving it to environmental causes. This year, because of changing circumstances, I'm going to give those funds to these other causes. You haven't given an additional $5,000. It's still the same $5,000. So when different situations are happening, it affects nonprofits, again, repeating, they're winners and they're losers. So if you have the potential, and every organization does, to be on the losing end, are you prepared for that? Do you have those rainy day reserves built up? Are you have the systems in place that you can go to your main contributors and say, hey, there's this economic downturn, there's a COVID pandemic. We need to shift our activities, or we need to readjust. May we come back to you outside your annual giving. So organizations that are becoming reliant on Giving Tuesday as a fundraiser could be raising more money on Giving Tuesday, but on the top end, but on the bottom end, it's getting cut on the bottom end from some other activity they were already doing.
It does make sense. And Hardy, maybe you could basically summarize the most important points that a board has to think about in terms of what their role is, the importance of communication. What I'll refer to a little bit different about not-for-profit, nonprofit boards is there is an expectation, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, that people who join these boards have a financial obligation as well, either to raise money or support the organization through their own donations. But maybe you could take the audience through the points that you emphasize around an effective board and the duties and responsibilities.
Absolutely. David, the number one responsibility for a nonprofit board, and from a legal standpoint, is governance. To provide governance oversight, with fiduciary responsibilities, and the board represents the interest of the shareholders, and in the case of nonprofits, the shareholders translates into the constituency being served, and that could be homeless veterans, it could be single mothers, it could be children who aren't getting proper nutrition or proper education. It could be pets and animals. It could be the environment. So whatever the constituency the nonprofit is committed to serve, the oversight and the protective cloak, if you will, looking out for their best interest is the board. Now, your point about fundraising, it's great when board members are able and willing to assist in fundraising. They're able and willing to make personal donations. The philosophical challenge I have with that is that too many organizations assume their board members are really nothing more than ATMs, and the organizations just figure that, well, you're on the board and you should know you're supposed to be giving and helping raise money. The challenge is too many organizations have that expectation, but they don't communicate the expectation to a prospective board member when they're in the recruiting phase of a board relationship, and not only communicating, but listening for acceptance that the individual board candidate is ready, willing, and able to commit to the individual financial obligation that particular organization has for its board members. And they don't have the ask up front because my experience says they're afraid the board member will turn them down. So they hold on to that request and mistakenly hold on to it, David, until after that individual is at the altar and they've said the vows and I do, now they're on the board, and oh, by the way, guess what, David? We're going to ask you to be involved in fundraising. We're going to ask you to write big checks every year. And now that can really be a huge turnoff when that ask isn't communicated in advance. So that's a big issue when there's the engagement issues around nonprofit board performance is something that many nonprofits across the country deal with. And the engagement issues can either be board members are not as engaged as they should be, or sometimes they overstep boundaries and are too engaged. So two different engagement situations. Another one of the challenges that organizations have around board members not doing what they're supposed to do, and that's what my book, Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game, that's the question that the book answers. Why don't board members do what they're supposed to do? Well, one of the main reasons is you don't have the right people. So you haven't recruited board members with intentionality, purpose, process. You haven't identified standards and expectations, and or have a strategic plan that you're recruiting board members to. So if you want to win a championship in sports, you go out and recruit championship players, right? So it's not just get anybody and stick them in a board seat and think they're going to be, they could be nice people, okay, but they're not equipped skill-wise, not equipped experience-wise, or bring to the table what your organization truly needs. So, not having the right people in far too many cases is one of the reasons boards don't perform as they should. My research to answer that question, why don't board members do what they're supposed to do? Board members tell me the top issue is that they have experienced that causes good board members to become disengaged, David, is poor communication. So if you stop and think about ideally who go around the boardroom, do a mental exercise and go around the boardroom, visualize who you would like to see around your board table. Well, you're probably looking for the top community leaders, the business leaders, the community leaders in your area, being served by the organization. And well, these are very busy people, and they're making time in their schedule to support your organization and the mission. Well, they're wanting timely communication. They don't want to see information such as a very important staff report about a service being provided that they're going to have to make a decision on, maybe a financial budgeting related decision. And they don't get that information until just they show up at the meeting, or maybe the email an hour or two before the meeting. Think in advance, communicate in advance. What do your board members want to know? What do they need to know? And how do they individually prefer to be communicated with? All too often, we just don't, as a sector, we don't spend the time necessary to communicate with board members the way we should, and in a way that allows them to exercise their governance and fiduciary responsibilities. So timing is important. No surprises is very important. So poor communication. So communication is not about just more, because you may be writing reports, sending emails, doing all kinds of communication activities. It's about communicating effectively. And one other key point, David, and I appreciate a chance to elaborate on these items because they're so very important. related to the performance of nonprofit boards. If you want different results from your board performance, create a positive board experience. Individuals don't volunteer, and a lot of times we forget that board members are volunteers. We may treat our volunteers with all types of respect and appreciation, and we recognize their efforts and thank them for their efforts. But how often do board members get that same feeling of being appreciated? So board members as individuals who are volunteering, especially extremely busy individuals who are sitting on boards, don't want their time wasted. They do want to make an impact. So do your meetings. Think about this, David. How many meetings do you go to during the course of a week or during the course of a month that you are in your head wondering, why in the world did you bother to show up? Make your board meetings an event that is a not to be missed meeting rather than blown off as just a useless waste of time.
Hardy, I can tell you, without obviously identifying the entity, I was invited onto the board of a nonprofit. In part, it was based upon the invitation came because of my historical financial contributions and my interest in the space and such. And what I did find once I got on was that there were meetings where there were presentations about what the not-for-profit was doing, and then corresponding, requests for additional checks, and very little effort to enlist. And it was a diverse board. The idea is talent, participation, to have a directional impact on the nonprofit. And I did have, quite frankly, it took a couple of years, but I accumulated over time precisely the response that you described. Not feeling appropriately integrated, used, and sort of wondering why I had agreed to get on the board, because I didn't really have time for, the
Right.
6 meetings and things like that occurred throughout the year.
Well, if you think about this, if I'm out recruiting for a board, and I've got a chance to get several new board members who have the level of qualifications that David Lawrence does. Well, think about this. I would certainly appreciate the personal contributions. That's great. But I am willing to not take a very big risk here, and with this statement, that I am willing to say that based on David Lawrence's experience, that his insight, sharing his experience, his thoughts and observations of how the organization can better be suited to move into the future, is probably going to have a far higher value than a monetary contribution. I'm going to say I'm confident I can say that without taking any risk. So multiply what David Lawrence brings to the table as a board member times the rest of your board members, and just think about that value. So I think that we as a sector are we underappreciate our board members. We're not, we're interested in those checks quite often, but we're not seeing a bigger picture, a higher value. And that's why I say use your board as a high value asset.
It's a great insight. Let me just pivot. One of the things we spoke about before this call is why some of the lessons here that you're applying in the nonprofit world are not equally applicable to the for-profit world, whether it's a private company or a public company. And without taking a lot of time, Hardy, some of the issues that have confronted nonprofits look remarkably similar to the issues that public and private for-profit companies have faced, where there have been advantages to having a strong and engaged board, and I would say a diverse board, both in terms of talent, but also in terms of backgrounds and racial composition and gender, because the not-for-profit world has had issues involving everything from cyber attacks to security concerns to obviously financial reporting, some of the interactions with government regulators, workplace conduct, hiring practices, cyber hygiene, the need to be protective and proactive. Also in terms of where they solicit money from and accept money, so sort of know your customer. And certainly the nonprofits are not immune from some of the headline risks, some of the legal and regulatory risk, what I refer to as reputational risk. Scandal is capable of killing off even a sophisticated company, no less a nonprofit. And so I'd love you to share your perspective with the audience about the types of issues that nonprofits face and similarly, whether these lessons, at least as I'm interpreting them, are equally applicable to the, I'll call it the for-profit world.
Really enjoy that scenario. So let me share maybe 3 or 4 really quick situations where certainly improvement is needed in the nonprofit sector, and the for-profit corporate world can certainly pay attention and not duplicate these mistakes or shortcomings. Number one would be that the nonprofit sector, as I mentioned in the beginning, has a reinforced behavior of continuing to take action on what they call best practices, and the best practices that they've picked up either historically, someone attended a conference, read a book, or they see another organization, going in a certain direction. But the lesson here is best practices for one organization, one entity, may or may not be a best practice for your particular organization. And if also a subset of that, David, if organizations continue to take the same approach on such as board recruiting that we touched on briefly, but that board recruiting process is not getting the results or the board members getting you the right people, then why insist on continuing to follow practices that don't work? And you're continuing to do the same thing and thinking you're going to get a different result. And we've all heard that saying. Another situation is that for a lot of different reasons, and it's a whole nother program for another time, I know, but we all understand in the world of nonprofits, the business sector, we all understand the benefit of good planning. Well, in the world of nonprofits, although understanding the benefit of good planning, far too many organizations, David, just turn and go the opposite way. They'll say, well, the planning we've done doesn't work, or the planning we've done, the plan sits on the shelf and we don't follow it. We're too busy working hard to do good. We don't have time to take for good planning. Well, just think about all the different situations and issues that not having a good solid plan to follow, especially as in earlier when we mentioned some of the disruptive in environmental influences that we just have a history of going through, and we know those disruptions are always going to be with us. It's just a question of what disruptive cause are we dealing with at the present time, but not investing in good planning. So for-profit companies, don't make that mistake. Reduce risk through good planning that anticipates, the what if questions, and have those solutions in advance. And another key lesson that I think certainly relates from the nonprofit world crossing over to the for-profit world. In the world of nonprofits and the social sector, David, if you consider donors, customers, for purposes of this conversation, the nonprofit world has an abysmal record of donor retention. It is abysmal. And there are reasons, well-documented reasons, lack of follow-up, lack of good communication, not thanking their donors. It's just, it just doesn't even make sense. But so organizations, far too many organizations, lose more donors than they bring in every year. So does that make sense? Is that a sustainable business model? No. So from the for-profit side of the equation, learn from the mistakes that nonprofits are making with donor retention, and don't make those mistakes with your own customer base, your customer service applications, the use of your customer service databases, and the relationships that you establish with your customers. So those are some key crossover issues that I think that certainly offer lessons, and nonprofit professionals that are listening to this podcast, and perhaps even board members, take a look at the for-profit world. Look at the examples of great customer service. Look at the example of foresight and planning and anticipating into the future, how organizations can weather economic storms or pandemic storms or periods of uncertainty, and look and see how that when there's a result that's being realized, how organizations do shift and do look for a different direction to take and getting a different result by doing something different. So both sides of the nonprofit and the for-profit worlds can learn from each other.
Hardy, thanks again for spending time and sharing the insights, and obviously accumulated over a very long and obviously terrific career. Again, thanks, and I want to thank the members of our audience for listening in. And as I indicated, Hardy, I look forward to a continued conversation down the road.
All good. David, thank you so very much.
Hardy Smith is the author of Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game, a how-to guide on fixing some of the fundamental problems that plague many nonprofits and associations. You can find his book at hardysmith.com. David Lawrence is, of course, the founder of RANE. We are the Risk Assistance Network and Exchange, a global risk intelligence company providing critical insights, analysis, and support to risk and security professionals, enabling them to more effectively anticipate, monitor, and respond to emerging risks and threats. Join the millions who are tapping into the collective wisdom of the world's largest community of risk professionals. Visit ranenetwork.com. That's RANE network.com. Thank you for listening.